candidate. The League of Women Voters, as an organization, we encourage informed and active participation of citizens in their government. We work to increase understanding of major public policy issues, and we influence public policy through education and advocacy. This forum this evening, one of the reasons we chose this forum is because at the local level, the local league has chosen 3 topics to concentrate this biennium, and education happens to be one of them. And we are delighted to have an expert panel on this subject, and we are also very delighted to have an absolutely fabulous moderator for the evening to take us through these discussions on this important subject. And there's plenty of ample opportunity for all of you to ask questions also. You will be given index cards, and you can write your questions on that. Raise your hand. Volunteers will come, take your question, bring it to the moderator, and the moderator will pose the questions. If you have the question for a specific panelist, please indicate that on the index card. If not, the moderator can throw the question to anyone, and they will all try to answer your question. And we hope to get a very interesting, but there is a lot of good things happening in schools. There are lots of challenges, and we hope by the end of this evening, they'll be sharing their experiences with us. Now, to moderate this discussion, we have picked a person who needs no introduction. No introduction to San Antonio, and especially no introduction when it comes to public school arena. He is a product of Texas. He went to the Northeast ISD's Lee High School, and then he went to Trinity University, University of Austin, UTSA, and then he was at the helm of the Northeast ISD for 21 years, from 1990 to 2011 as the superintendent. His contributions are so many, and the list is so long, that I am not going to even attempt to, you all are familiar with his accomplishments and his contributions to the San Antonio public school system. So with no further delay, I want to introduce my friend and our moderator for this evening, Dr. Richard Middleton.
Thank you, Monica. I'm going to model something right now, and I'm going to silence my phone. Well, it is indeed a pleasure to be here this afternoon to talk to you about the future of Texas. And I want to thank the League of Women Voters of the San Antonio area for the title. It said, "The Future of Public Education." And I think that's a very optimistic note, and I love that we do have a great future in store for us. And I know that the panel that we have today is made up of some people who have not only been in the business for a while, but they've excelled at what they do. And they have really demonstrated a passion and an ability to lead and create as we determine how we're going to continue to provide the future of public education in this great state. Now, I know that this body is apolitical, but I do want to make one introduction, and I know that if there are others that need to be, I will certainly do that later. But we just finished a legislative session in the state of Texas, and those folks have come home for a little bit, and they will go back in July. And we will talk about that a little in our presentations. And those people dedicate themselves and have done, many of them have done outstanding work. In San Antonio, this representative that is here this evening is the vice chair of the House Public Education Committee, and representing this area, I believe this same geographic area. And I'd like to introduce Representative and Vice Chair Diego Bernal. So let's proceed. This evening, we have 4 people, as I said, and I'll introduce them, and then they're going to make a 10-minute presentation. After that, then I will ask each one of them a particular question that came out of their presentation for about 5 minutes, and then we'll open up the discussion. And I think you'll see that they are very well prepared because of where they have been and where they are going. Dr. Shari Albright. Dr. Albright serves as the Murchison Distinguished Professor of Practice in Education and the Chair of the Department of Education at Trinity University. She is the past president of the Texas Association for Colleges of Teacher Education and serves as the secretary of the Municipal Board for the NOWCastSA, a citywide early childhood initiative in San Antonio. She is also a member of the governing board of the Holsworth Center, and we will hear hopefully more about that in her presentation, a new statewide educational leadership center for Texas. But I will tell you personally, I have seen her expertise not only in the college level, but also in elementary leadership, secondary leadership that she provided in Northeast School District, where she really created and started the International School for the Americas, which was our magnet program on the Lee campus, following Ms. Chula Boyle. So we have a person here who has great college education and credentials, but also a wealth of public education and also public nonprofit experience as well, as she returned back from New York City. Catherine Clark is a senior consultant at the Texas Association of School Boards for the past 26 years, serving as the association's school finance expert. In addition, she headed the Governmental Relations Division of the association in 2013 and led an in-house research organization for several years. She has a doctoral degree in educational policy from Stanford University. For those of us who have walked the great halls in the Pink Building in Austin, anytime that you have an educational hearing and anytime that you had research going on, and anytime you called upon experts to testify about policy over the years, Catherine Clark was always a member of that group. She is an outstanding educator and research person, and we look forward to hearing from her. Pedro Martinez is the superintendent from the San Antonio Independent School District. He has had more than 20 years of experience in the private, nonprofit, and public education sectors. Dr. Martinez most recently was superintendent in residence for the Nevada Department of Education in Reno, Nevada, and was responsible for advising the governor's office and the state superintendent of instruction on educational policies and decisions. As superintendent for Washoe County School District, he improved graduation rates and increased the percentage of students participating in and passing the advanced placement exam, something very close to my heart since I just retired from the College Board. He is a data-driven leader with a strong financial background and in-depth knowledge of academic and reform strategies. He has an MBA from DePaul University and a bachelor's from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. And I will tell you, he got his career started off at Chicago Public Schools, which was quite an introduction to public education. Pedro has been so greatly welcomed here in San Antonio and has been doing a very ambitious and I think a very encouraging and wonderful program and visioning for San Antonio ISD, and we welcome him. Dr. Brian T. Woods is a longtime Northside educator. He became superintendent in July of 2012, but he began his career in Northside in 1992 as a social studies teacher at Marshall High School, and then also went on to in administration to work at O'Connor as an assistant principal and also the deputy superintendent for administration in 2008. Dr. Woods has leadership at the University of, has his PhD from the leadership of, educational leadership at the University of Texas at San Antonio, and serves as the executive committee for the Texas Association of School Administrators, and is the chair of the Regional Advisory Executive Committee in Education at the Service Center Region 20. He is a member of the Go Public Steering Committee, the board on the board of P16 Plus Council of Greater Bexar County, and San Antonio Chamber of Commerce, where he serves on 2 of its committees. He has also been very involved in the advisory board of the Principals Institute and also working on the Fast Growth School Coalition. He's also the superintendent of a very successful and one of the largest school districts in the state of Texas, not only to mention San Antonio, I've known Dr. Woods, I've known Brian for a long time, and we are very pleased that he is here with us today to add to our discussion. We're going to start off in a very imaginative way. It's alphabet by, and we'll start our presentations. Dr. Albright.
First, thank you to the League of Women Voters. Gosh, since 1920, they have been leading the way on educating, engaging, and protecting voters, not only here in San Antonio, but across this country. And gosh, they could be no more valuable than they are right now, so we thank them for everything that they're doing. So I'm going to just go in and confess up front, 35 years in education, and I am the Pollyanna at the table. I am an eternal optimist, and I actually believe that we are at an incredibly, incredibly exciting time in education. And for a few reasons. We know more about how people learn now than we ever have at any moment in time. We have more tools to assist with that learning than at any other point, and obviously that includes the exploding technological revolution that's happening and the opportunities it presents for us to tap into those different ways of learning. We are reaching more students and a more diverse array of students than we have at any other time in history. I mean, there was a day and a time when your child had challenges and there was no place for them in schools, and that is no longer the truth anymore, thank goodness, to our public schools. We are offering more customization, optimization, personalization than any point since probably the one-room schoolhouse when we had to do that. You know, we have stepped out of the industrial area, the industrial age of schooling and that factory model of schooling in really remarkable ways in many, many places. There's still some old holdouts, and we're working on those, but on the whole, we have moved past the industrial era schooling model. And we're also engaged in a full set of new and dynamic partnerships in education with higher ed, with philanthropy, with business and industry, that are really deeper and more meaningful than what we've seen in the past. There's a new middle model around it. And it's actually partnerships that I'd like to take my few minutes to speak about and to talk about. So public education and higher education need each other. We are inextricably interdependent. Our missions are interdependent, and rightly so. And frankly, our public accountability is interdependent, and rightly so. And so I come at it from a teacher preparation, principal preparation, school psychologist preparation kind of stance. And research confirms that deep clinical practice, doing the real work of becoming a teacher, of becoming a principal, of becoming a school psychologist is absolutely essential. And those deep student teaching experiences, those deep leadership internship experiences are the things that we are desperately in partnership with our public schools around. How do we provide the best learning laboratories so that that next generation of educators comes along as the most prepared, the most able, the most ready to take on the challenges of the 21st century? And frankly, public schools need us to enhance that pipeline. We are standing on the brink of a teacher shortage here in the state of Texas and nationally. And I think my colleagues up here would tell us that we're also standing on the brink of a leadership shortage here in the state and nationally. And that's for a variety of reasons. We have an aging educational workforce. We have retirements aplenty. We have lower numbers of folks coming into the education pipeline. And that presents us some challenges that we can perhaps look at tonight. And that's for a variety of reasons. We watch a dip in our enrollment every time there's a legislative session where school funding is at an issue and that we see teacher cutbacks. It diminishes the amount of folks coming into the pipeline. The media and the public image of teaching is not helping us. It is not saying that this is an admirable profession that should be held up. And I think we're starting to change that line, but I think that's well worth our consideration perhaps this evening. And then frankly, the teachers are getting a misshapen image of what teaching is. It was hijacked by misperceptions around a test prep curriculum that's all that they can teach. And we know in many, many, many of our school districts and schools that is not what the curriculum and what teaching and instruction looks like. And yet that has been the rhetoric that is certainly out there that is hurting our recruitment in that regard. I also think that we have some challenges around educator preparation programs, like anything else, whether it's schools, whether it's educator preparation programs, whether it's businesses. There are great ones and there are struggling ones. There are ones that are out there to make a buck no matter what, and there are those that have a mission-driven spirit about what they're trying to do. And we, here in the state of Texas, have opened the door to for-profit preparation programs that are ill-preparing many of our teachers to come into schools. For the first time, 3 years ago, we tipped the balance that more teachers were prepared through alternative certification programs than through traditional routes through universities, with much less accountability for those outcomes. And that's a challenge I think we have to face. And what it creates then are folks who come in less prepared. It creates a churn in our schools because they leave the profession. It's a hard job. People used to say it's not rocket science. I'm going to say it may be. It is such an intensely human endeavor that that is not formulaic, that it's not if X happens, you do Y. It is about human relationships. And so I think that that is one of the pieces that we have to look at. And I'll be honest, our for-profit preparation programs of alternative preparation are not preparing them in our wealthiest suburban schools who say, sure, send us a teacher that doesn't have much training and we'll put them in and make them the teacher of record and train them up. That is not where it's happening. We're doing that on the backs of our most poor and vulnerable children in this community. And I think it's something we're doing. And again, research tells us the #1 factor of student achievement is the quality of the teacher in that classroom, followed second only by the quality of the principal that supports that teacher, that hires that teacher, that creates the school climate and culture in which that teacher can flourish, as well as the students and their families. So we know it's important. And I think we're at an exciting time at looking at new partnerships around that. I'm hoping that Pedro and I'll get to talk a little bit about a new partnership that we've engaged in between Trinity, San Antonio Independent School District, and the Center of the City Education Partnership here in San Antonio, which is a collaborative of funders who've come together around public education. We've created a new school that opened last fall called the Advanced Learning Academy, housed at both the old Austin Academy and at Fox High School. And I think we're trying to forge new ways and partnerships that not only include new learning for students, but that also include pipelines of training for teachers and for administrators in this community that are going to stay in this community and work. So then, in addition to my work with all of that fun that I get to have at Trinity University, I have the blessing of being part of the Holdsworth Center. And I just want to say a few words about that because I think that's a unique partnership. And I actually think we should be very discerning in the kinds of partnerships we're looking at between whether it's higher ed, whether it's the nonprofit world, whether it's businesses and industry. Charles Butt, who we know to be a friend of public education, a supporter of public education, one of our biggest champions for many, many years, really went to look and see what his legacy was going to be in the state of Texas. And for that, he created the Holdsworth Center. And the Holdsworth Center is focusing on superintendents and their teams, and then cascading down to cohorts of principals in a select set of districts, that every 2 years a new set of districts will be chosen. And the problem of practice they're working on is leadership development and talent pipelines. And how can we work with teams to build their personal leadership, their effective teaming, their ability to manage change, and think about building robust systems and structures. And not just, what I think is unique about the partnership is not that it's just come, learn, and we send you back to your district. But we're placing a team of support, district support folks in their districts for 5 years to help them take the new learning, go back and apply it, and work on their own problem of practice. Not one that we've designed for them, not one that we're prescribing from the Holdsworth Center, but one that makes the most sense to them around this leadership challenge. So I think that's the kind of partnership that's essential that I hope that we're going to be looking toward about how do we not have outside entities that come in and impose solutions, but that we have people who say, let us stand with you and walk with you along pathways in public education to improve our districts, to improve our schools, to support the learning that's happening. And so I'll stop there for now. I hope that maybe we'll circle back around to some of it.
Catherine?
My area is school finance, so let's talk about that. Funding of public education is a shared responsibility between the state government and local government, the school district. That's the arrangement in Texas, it's the arrangement in every state except for Hawaii. Hawaii has just one school system. it's common range. And there's the tension, isn't there, between what the state wants generally and what local school districts need specifically. And
Could you speak into the microphone?
my technician here is going to help me.
Why don't you take this one?
Thank you. Does that help back there?
There we go.
Okay. Thank you. On the school finance front, it's a shared responsibility of state and local government, and that shared arrangement is spelled out in the education code. So we know how much school districts are going to get, and in fact, what the state does, it tells school districts how much they're going to spend. The technical term for it is the local fund assignment, but that's what they're told, and the state brings in what the legislature appropriates. I'll mention in a moment the efforts that were made this legislative session to provide funding for public school students that exceeds what we had in the last biennium, and what I think the future is for that. I think there is a wider spread belief than maybe those of us in the room hear very often that public education is in a crisis, that it's in a failure mode. And I don't think this is necessarily an accident. And I link that to school finance by saying that it's hard to do the many things you've just heard about without resources. It's much easier to do them on the cheap, as you've heard. And on the cheap, we don't always get the quality or the quantity that we're looking for. When I think about the widespread feeling that schools are in crisis, I don't think it's an accident that this is spreading around the country. I'm a little less optimistic than others here at the table. There's a contingent in America, and I think it's growing, that doesn't like government, or they've been told government is the problem, not the solution. They feel government is wasteful somehow, though they have some difficulty pointing out how it might be wasteful in a general way. There's always some odd thing that happens in local government or state government that looks to be wasteful, and they feel like their resources are being wasted. There's a pushback against things like standards and uniformity. They have heard of children being referred to as snowflakes. Everyone is special in their own way, and there is a desire among families to customize, if you will, their own experiences, including the educational experiences of their children. And from that, we get presses for charter schools of choice, funded by the public, so they're public schools, but different schools and magnet schools. But there's also a press for parents to be able to take public tax money and spend it in private school settings or for private education products, if you will, online learning, tutoring, and other things that are purchased in the private sector without the kind of oversight and constant observation, frankly, that public schools receive from the community and from our state's leaders as well. Along with the things that I've mentioned so far, I hear way too often the disparagement of school boards and superintendents, as though for some reason somebody would run for an office that pays nothing for an opportunity to meet endlessly, late into the night, about really intractable problems and difficult things to deal with, like how do we fund the budget and provide a teacher pay increase when we didn't get additional resources from the legislature. Why would somebody do that unless it was important to them in a positive way? People who are school superintendents are smart people. There are a lot of other jobs that they could have taken, and there are lots of jobs that are available to them right now. They do it because they have a heart for it. And it's distressing to me, having been in this business for a long time and being the daughter of a school superintendent, that I hear this too often. But I don't think it's an accident. I think there are processes and activities in motion in the country that are making this more probable than we would hope for. Well, let's talk a little bit positively, since we have Representative Bernal here especially. The legislature did make an effort to look at school funding and to do something about it. I was testified as an informational witness at 2 Senate hearings and 1 House hearing about a plan that I hope school boards develop. My friends and colleagues and organization called the Equity Center had a different plan, just as good. They presented that. The larger school districts have an organization they call the Texas School Alliance. And they presented their plan to legislators. Legislators got a chance to ask questions, probe the data that people brought. There was no one can say that ideas were not presented. Viable ideas, ideas that people had put computers to show how they would actually affect individual school districts. When it came to writing legislation, it was the House that came up with a bill. And the House bill was understandably not richly funded, but they did offer an additional $1.5 billion. At one point it was $1.8 billion. Additional dollars beyond what the formulas would say to help improve the funding of public education. It was a bill that was an excellent start for school funding, and it received strong support, certainly from the committee, the Education Committee in the House, but on the House floor as well. And it went over to the Senate, and instead of treating it like a school finance bill, it became a vehicle for voucher. And that was the end of that. When the Senate passed their version with the voucher attached to it, the House wanted nothing more to do with it. The special legislative session that's been called is not being called to reconsider school finance. There are two school funding things that I think are important in the upcoming special session. One is the desire to pass legislation that would create a special commission to study school finance. And of course, that's helpful. It's always good to have people continuing to look at it, but it's not for lack of studying, folks. I can tell you that from personal experience, and the people at the table can confirm that as well. The other school funding issue is the idea that school districts would provide teachers, $1,000 a year raise, but without any additional funding. They figure there's enough waste and slack in the budgets that the school district could come up with $1,000 for each teacher, regardless of where they are on the salary schedule, regardless of how well they're performing in their classroom, and not considering the effect of the entire salary system for the school district when a particular group of employees gets a raise, but no one else does. So there are school finance issues coming up in the special session, but they're not the kind of school finance issues that would flow additional resources through the formulas in a fair way to all school districts to help them support all students. I have a little soapbox piece that I've been giving at talks in the last week or so, and that is my despair at what's happened with pre-kindergarten funding in the state of Texas. Not that many years ago, pre-kindergarten was funded for through the formulas for certain students, but more importantly, there was an additional $225 million set aside specifically for pre-kindergarten, either to help school districts educate more youngsters in pre-kindergarten or have them have longer or more robust pre-kindergarten programs. That's narrowed down to a handful of $1 million. It shrunk almost 90%. And yet, the period of time in the last 10 years, we know more and more with certainty that youngsters really benefit from a high-quality first start in school, and pre-kindergarten is the place for many of them will get that high-quality start. And yet, we haven't seen fit to fund it appropriately. And hats off to the school districts in this area for continuing to fund pre-kindergarten, making difficult budget decisions in order to make that happen. So I'll stop with that on the school finance front and turn the microphone over to the next speaker.
Thank you, Kathy. Mr. Martinez.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me here. I feel blessed to be here with you. So I'll talk about a few things. One, give you perspective on our district. I'm just finished my second year here in the school district, second year here in San Antonio. I would tell you that every day I learn more. I love the tradition and the history of San Antonio. and it has its blessings and great achievements, but at the same time, also unintended consequences. So for example, research has shown, and a couple of research studies have come out, that San Antonio has the largest segregation of any city in the country when it comes to income. And I will tell you, for anybody who comes brand new to San Antonio and you drive around, it is very visible. I was amazed at how visible it was. By the way, we have some amazing school districts, Northeast, Northside, Alamo Heights. I think they have great leadership. They've had great leadership. You've seen how they've benefited the city of San Antonio, and I think they're a blessing. But unintended consequences is that we have left pockets of poverty, deep poverty in specific areas. And frankly, the standards are the same for every child. Sadly, in the state, you will find out that for the most part, resources are the same for every child. And so that creates just some unique challenges. So in my district, for example, we serve just under 53,000 children. The median income for my families is about $30,000. How do we know that? We actually went and looked at census data and the addresses of our children, and we're able to look at that school by school, and we know that. By the way, county average is about $60,000. That's also the national average. What does that mean when you have that? Well, of all my schools, there's only one that is close to the county average of $60,000. The vast majority are around $30,000, and we have some that are at $17,000. I have 7,000 children that are in public housing where the median income is under $12,000. So it just creates some unique challenges. So for example, when we're looking at trying to engage our parents, my parents are working sometimes 2 jobs. They're working minimum paid jobs. There's amazing research that talks about scarcity. So what happens when you are in a situation, regardless of how smart you are, but yet you're thinking about survival. You're thinking about where your next meal is going to come from. You're thinking about how you're going to pay the rent. What if somebody gets sick in your family? What if you happen to have a car, what if it breaks down? Right? So those challenges, and so at the same time, we're trying to engage parents around, look, we got to make sure your child has good grades. You got to make sure the attendance is there. You got to, there's these, just unique challenges, or not unique challenges, but challenges that every parent faces. So what are we doing in our district? So we're taking it directly on. We just said, let's really start changing the conversation that it is about access, and it is about the fact that our children have the intellectual capability of any child as long as they have access to resources and to quality education. That is what we're going to show. By the way, nationally, this is a national problem. Statewide, it's fascinating. The Commissioner of Education, Mike Morath, who I have a huge admiration for, showed recently that our state overall has not served children that live in poverty well. Less than 10% of our children that live in poverty have been successful, that are college ready, they've been successful in college. That's statewide, by the way. Here's what's scary for everybody, here's what's something that's concerning that everybody should know about. The population of poverty is growing in our state. We're one of the fastest growing states in the country, and the population that's growing the fastest is our high poverty population. Over the next several years, the majority of our children will live in poverty. Brian is seeing it in Northside, Northeast is seeing it. The numbers are growing statewide. And so again, how does this connect with the finance formula? Well, we have formulas that have not been updated in decades. So in essence, we're working with an antiquated financial system that is in some cases more than 20 years old, at least 10 years old in almost every aspect of every funding formula. So how do districts make it work? Well, if you're fortunate where you're a district that your enrollment's growing, you're getting additional revenue, even though these problems haven't changed for the number of growing children, and you make it work. If you're a district like mine that has either been flat or even slightly declining, it becomes a significant challenge every single year. And for us, for example, in our district, we feed children over 3 meals a day because we know that we have to. We have social workers on staff because we know we have to. I have to have behavioral specialists because we know we have to. My children see a lot of trauma. And so those are just challenges that we say, look, we're not going to, and we partner, by the way, we partner with great not-for-profits here in the community, we partner with the city, we partner with the county, and now, what we're doing also is partnering with our higher ed partners. So let me just share with you some of the things that we're doing, and again, we're trying to change this conversation. So first of all, to prove this theory that our children have the intellect, they have the ability as long as they have access to quality education, is we said, let's create some new models, new school models that nobody's ever seen before, and let's see what happens. So, for example, we partnered with Trinity and opened up the Advanced Learning Academy, and we put it in these 2 sites that historically have been under-enrolled. Historically, I would even argue that they were slated for closure because the enrollment just kept declining every single year. We now have the Advanced Learning Academy is just starting its 2nd year. Next year, by the way, will be one of my top 3 schools in the district. Very diverse population, very diverse in terms of income, very diverse in terms of academically, children that are advanced, children that need a lot of support. And what I love about this school is now it has a waiting list. We have a waiting, in fact, I have headaches now, and I won't go into more detail, but I have headaches now because I'm getting calls about when is my child going to get off the waiting list? How can how can my child not be able to get in? We created an all-boys school last year, my first year, that is also going to be one of my top 3 schools, and we have a waiting list there. And it's a school that's just very different. It's all boys. These are boys that were challenged in other schools, and their self-confidence is being built up. And so we have 4 new models that are opening up this fall alone, including the first 100% dual language academy in San Antonio, which was at Twain Middle School that will start with pre-K2 this year. We have now a waiting list. We will start the first Montessori, free public Montessori school in the entire city of San Antonio and in Bexar County. Again, we're getting waiting lists. So we're changing the conversation that when we provide these quality options, parents will respond. In addition, by the way, as we're doing that, we're also establishing the largest international baccalaureate program in the Jefferson area. So Woodlawn Academy has become the first school in San Antonio that now has been authorized to be an international baccalaureate school in elementary and middle school. And here's what's fascinating about that school. So last year, when I went to it, it was a school that was starting to struggle. It was starting to have low performance. This year, we're already seeing the results. It's day and night. And what I love is that the kind of projects that these children are working on. They're looking at our society from a global lens. So when you're a child that lives in poverty, you have a certain perspective of the world. So usually you have a very specific radius where you live. So for example, I grew up as one of those children. So in Chicago, inner city, my world was basically between 16th Street and 22nd Street and between Halston and Western, which is about a 1-mile radius in Chicago. And that was my world. By the way, I could see the downtown, different world. I could see the university, different world. It wasn't me. This was my own world. That's what my children see. And so what we're doing is changing the perspective and saying, look at things differently. So for example, at Woodlawn Academy, I walked into a classroom where their project was what happened when the USSR was broken up back, remember that time, and different countries got formed, and they're analyzing every single country in terms of quality of healthcare, quality of education, the type of government they have now versus what they had before. By the way, this was a 4th grade classroom. So this is the type of work they're doing. So when I saw the results, the early results come in, I said, and they were completely off the charts. I said, well, no wonder. If you look at what these children are doing, it's just night and day. So we're changing the conversation about how education is perceived. Early indication. Now I'll tell you, we still have a ways to go. We're nowhere near done, but we are seeing early indicators of higher graduation rates, higher percentages of children going to top colleges and local colleges. So we feel we're starting to go on the right path. And I'll just end on this. I'm happy to take questions. There's a joke that there's only 5 people in the state that understand school finance. I believe we have one of them here, one of those 5. Here's what you should know, and here's what everybody, the millions of residents here in Texas should know. The way education is funded in our state is through your local property taxes. Every single year, as your property taxes go up, they go directly to the state. Unless you're growing in enrollment, like in Northside, they go directly to the state, and then it funds either growing districts or other districts. It just gets redistributed. And by the way, one data point, back in 2006, the percentage of local versus state was about 50-50. Today, it is 62% local, 38% state, and going down every single year. Why? Because when you don't change the funding formulas, and they're flat, that's what happens. And by the way, whose property taxes haven't gone up in the last, since 2006? So guess where they went? That's why that percentage has went down. So that is just something we need to understand about our state formula.
Thank you, Pedro. Dr. Woods.
Yes, sir. Can you hear me? Is that on? that better? Okay. Okay. I'd like to actually start by introducing a couple of other people who are in the audience. One is the kind of board member that Catherine talked about, that kind who comes to meetings, stays late into the night, makes hard decisions, goes to events, and gets paid not one red penny. And that's the new board president for Northside School District, Melissa Chumley, who's sitting in the back. Melissa, thank you for being here. Has the distinction of doing that in the Northside School District for well over 20 years now. So yeah, that's a lot of volunteers, no doubt about it. On your point about trustees earlier, I also want to introduce, for those who may not know, Priscilla Camacho with the San Antonio Chamber. Stand up and let us clap, and then I'll talk about you in a minute. So Priscilla does the education work for the Chamber, and there is no greater advocate for public education around than she is, and no one spent more time in the Capitol in the last few months than she did. So Priscilla, thanks for all that you do for all of us. Let me talk a little bit about our school district and some things that we believe and hold to be true and valuable, and then I'll make some comments about the recent legislative session, both positive and not so positive. So we educate a little more than 105,000 students in Northside schools. That number increases every year. The diversity of that student population on a socioeconomic standpoint is fairly dramatic. From families that are in that $20,000 a year income range to kids that live in the Dominion. And that presents a different set of challenges. Those families are very different. And to one of Catherine's points about expectations about what schooling is and what schooling should be and what it should look like are different to a degree across those groups. So some things that we believe as a system. One is we believe that kids and parents need to be treated not like there's 105,000 of them, but like there's 5, right? And we want to treat our folks like they're in a very intimate setting. And that's somewhat easier to do in an elementary school. It's somewhat harder to do in very large secondary schools, but that's a priority for us. Shari talked about leadership development, and she talked about one of the very few things that research in this business is crystal clear on is that the highest yield strategy is around high-quality teacher in the classroom to improve student performance. The second highest yield is principal in the building. And so we, to that end, put a lot of effort into growing folks to be great teachers in our system, and that starts with university preparation programs, just like Shari was talking about. We also put a lot of energy into leadership development within our system so that we're raising up the next generation of leaders. We're growing junior administrators to be future principals and so forth, because that is a way to set up, in essence, a structure that allows you to continue into the future with success. Succession planning is important to us. Again, somebody, maybe Shari said, the population of educators in our state, really nationally, is aging. And so succession planning is really important. Succession planning really adds value if you want to retain quality in your organization. We actually believe, and I know it's not maybe as popular as it used to be, this used to be a popular notion, we believe in the idea of well-rounded kids. That kids ought to have a variety of experiences from which they can grow and learn, some of which they'll learn not to like, and that's okay. Others of which they'll learn to love, and it will become something that will guide them to a career or a lifelong passion. We kind of see ourselves as an incubator for those kinds of ideas, that kind of thought. So to that end, in spite of budget issues that we can talk about ad nauseum, trustees and administrators in our district have chosen to fully fund fine arts programs from K through 12. We have 85,000 kids per day that participate in some way in the arts. And we fund athletics. And I know that some folks say that money gets wasted on athletics. And I'll tell you that my experience is kids who have passion for that, there are kids who come to school for that, and they pick up those things like English and math and a little science along the way because they're passionate around that thing. That is true, equally true with automotive technology. That is true with robotics. That is true with 1,000 other things. We really believe in this notion that kids ought to have a variety of experiences in the K-12 environment so that they can choose what really they are passionate about. I'll tell you that another phrase that's popular, probably too popular among educators, is data-driven. And maybe that's not just, maybe I'm just the educator in the room, and so that's all I know. Maybe everybody says that, but educators say it ad nauseum. And we're really not, we're not data-driven. And by that, I don't mean we are ignorant of the data. We are data-informed. We're really values-driven. Any organization that's going to have long-term success is driven by the values that people hold dear within the organization, and then certainly data informs their behavior and it helps them in their decision-making. But I think it's important to say values more is the higher priority of those two. So that's just a little bit about kind of what we believe from a 30,000 standpoint in our district. Let me just transition quickly to the legislative session. And you've heard, thanks to Representative Bernal and his colleagues in the House Public Education Committee, you've heard that there was a real conversation for the first time in a long time about what school funding could look like. It wasn't a quick fix. There is no such thing, I'm sure. There's no panacea talked about, but there was an honest-to-goodness conversation about school funding and perhaps a way forward. And not just a 2-year way forward until the next election cycle and the next legislative session, but a longer-term strategic look at a way forward in school funding in Texas. And I'll tell you, early in the session, I was probably more optimistic about the conversation. Even if it didn't translate into dollars per child, it was a very positive, in my mind, very healthy conversation. And so I don't need to go through the autopsy of what happened at the end of the session, folks in the newspaper, but what obviously that very healthy, productive conversation was for naught, and that did not happen because of competing interests on the other side of the Great Pink Building, and we can get into that. I'm happy to call names and say who I think's involved. I have no problem with that. So I'm happy to get into that. But it illustrates a larger point, and that is this about legislative sessions, and perhaps about where we are in our state for thoughtful people who vote. In any system, there needs to be an investment in infrastructure in order for the system to have long-term success. In Texas, we have chosen to focus on short-term issues to get us through to the next session, to get us elected the next time, Representative Bernal notwithstanding, rather than take a long-term view, an 8-year, a 12-year, a 20-year view of what might our state need. And I think one of the messages to me after a lot of ugliness at the end of the last legislative session, and we are set up for a lot more ugliness in the special session in July, I think the message for thoughtful voters is we need to hear from our candidates what the long-range planning is. Not so I get elected in 2 years, but what is the long-range planning around any issue? That's not just a public school issue. That's true around transportation funding. That's true around water planning in a state like Texas. Any long-term issue requires long-range infrastructure planning. We're just not set up for that by structure or personality in Texas right now.
Thank you, Dr. Woods. I also need to mention that Dr. Woods was also recognized as a distinguished graduate of UTSA. And I say that because Professor Sarah Harrington is here tonight, and her class is here this evening. I believe they are starting your first class in education.
It's a master's level class program for our first night for summer school.
Oh, fantastic. And welcome. You're hearing from the best tonight, and you're also knowing that this is a very high calling, and that to educate and prepare the future, there is no better. So as we heard from our panel, and we talked about a number of things, one question comes to mind that I'd really like to present to them, and that is the whole issue of how do we assess and know what we're doing. And we have had so many changes in the last 25 years about what does it take to prepare a student. For those of you who remember the 4x4, the 4x4 was that every student in high school would take 4 years of math, science, social studies, and English. And that went away and was replaced by House Bill 5, which gave us a number of alternatives to prepare students for graduation. But the question still remains that we are still struggling to try to recognize a way or find a way to show how school districts are doing and how students are being prepared. And now we've just had the last iteration, I believe, of A to F, and that just was passed in this last session. So I'd like to ask each panel from their perspective that what is the best way, what is the most effective way that schools can be evaluated to show that they are making progress? Is it an A to F, or is it something else, or is it strictly by test? And I know that the first person I'll call on, again by alphabetical order, did a lot of work in redesigning how students learn when she was at ISA. So Dr. Albright, what is the best way?
So my concern with the A through F system and other systems like that is it's so reductionist that I'm not sure it's helpful. And then you heard me say earlier that, you know, people say teaching isn't rocket science, and I actually think it is. The entire enterprise of school is an incredibly complex, interconnected, human-centered entity. And so those reduction systems that let us easily say they're a C or they're a B or, God forbid, they're an F, and what happens there, is not particularly helpful. It doesn't help a school know what to do. It doesn't help the community know what to do. So there's a granularity, I think, in how we look at schools, and a complexity, frankly, in how we look at schools. I'd love to say that we can just boil everything down to something simple, and if X happens, we do Y. That is simply not the nature of schooling. And so with that in mind, I think assessment of students is similar. You heard Dr. Woods talk about us wanting to look at the whole child, that there is something to letting students grow in all aspects. And yet we are not measured on that in any sort of way. And frankly, it scares me a little bit on what that might look like if they wanted to measure us and all of that. But there are ways that we can do things. Technology enables ways. There are smart exams that allow students to craft more complex answers to things, that where the test or the assessment is actually a learning process for students. And we just aren't there yet. We continue to go with a very safe, bubble-in, quickly scannable way to measure people. And that's a really inadequate yardstick, I think, for all of that. And I think that's across the board. It's across the board in how we assess whether teachers are ready to come in. That should be a performance-based process. Principals coming in. It should be a performance-based process. And frankly, we're looking at those kinds of things in the state and yet not turning around and saying, what would it mean for it to be a performance-based process for students that is nuanced, that is smart? We don't fare well on the PISA exams, the international exams, because those exams are much smarter, nuanced, problem-solving based exams that are not reliant on what you've learned, but of actually leveraging everything you've learned to discern a new response. That's higher order thinking in our world. And yet, our tests actually probably dissuade us from teaching to that very kind of thinking in many ways. And so, the old saying that what we measure gets taught. I think we should be much more careful with what we're measuring.
Thank you. Catherine?
We have an accountability system in the state that's pretty complicated to understand and convey to ordinary citizens, but I think it contains the framework of something that could be useful for us. We do need to know how students can perform on measures that help us understand what they've learned and what they need to learn going forward. And we need to have conversations at the state about that as opposed to questions about, where's the A to cut off, where's the F cut off. You'll be amused to learn that there is a bill passed that requires the state to come up with a system that would make it a mathematical possibility that all school districts could get an A. Well, of course, that's what we want. We want every school district and every campus to be an A campus. What is this, normal curve distribution about? It's not, and we've kind of passed the point of reason on some of our accountability measures. What we can go back to, and part of the framework the accountability system had, was a component called the student and parent engagement component, or community engagement. And it was something that school districts themselves could create and measure themselves on and promote it as they saw fit. And I think having that local component would be certainly helpful. I mean, the gentlemen on both sides of me have amazing ideas and would probably come up with something with their administrators that would be really helpful in articulating exactly what the district's doing, how far it's gone, and where they think it needs to go in the future. So I'm hopeful that at some point soon we can refine our accountability system in the state to be more useful in helping us understand how schools and districts are doing, and to help them, not just to label them.
Pedro?
Absolutely. So I think for us, when you look at our new models that we're creating them in a certain way where basically if you look at the underlying assumption we have is we want our children to love to learn. And so, for example, the Advanced Learning Academy, everything is project-based. Everything is with their hands. We use a little bit of technology, but I'll tell you, we do amazing things with cardboard. We have an architecture club in the 3rd grade where the teacher there they actually do models, like architecture models. At the Young Man Leadership Academy, they have a lot of technology because boys love technology. All the furniture is movable. But what's amazing about that school is not the technology, but the systems they built where the boys are working in groups, they're working together, they're problem solving together. So for us, and what I find with those 2 schools is 2 examples, they do that and the test results take care of themselves because they're just at a higher level. And so for us, I do worry about the A through F system because it does come at it from such a negative perspective. And we know that children that live in poverty, they're going to start at a lower level just because of challenges, because maybe their family's working 2 jobs, they don't have access to go to the library. Like my family and I, we go to the library every single week. That's one of our hobbies that we do. And my son, has had access as a 6-year-old to thousands of books. And that's his favorite. That's what he loves to do. My parents couldn't do that for me. Not because they didn't love me, not because they brought me up to be honest, to have integrity, but again, my father was working 2 jobs. I'm the oldest of 12 children, 10 of us still alive, good Catholic family, and that was just the way we were raised, and so it was teachers that really had made a difference in my life. And so for us, I do worry about how we measure that. I think one of the things that I worry about just here in Texas is that we've been so test-driven that we forget about instilling the love of learning. We did put in a diagnostic that actually shows our parents where the children are at, not only within our district, but nationwide. So I would say the other side of it is that as we look at results, Dr. Albright talked about the PISA results, we also got to make sure that we look at things nationally because sometimes we can be a little bit isolated here in Texas. And I have children that, we got a child that's going into Georgetown, 3 that are going to Middlebury in Vermont. So we're again expanding the scope of our children so they could see what's happening nationally. And so, and many of them, by the way, will still stay in Texas. College Station, UT Austin, Texas Tech, and UTSA, and Texas A&M San Antonio got the majority of my graduates. But still, we want them to have that larger perspective.
Thank you. Dr. Wood.
So I'll avoid a diatribe on A through F. It's a long one. Well rehearsed, well practiced. So one thing I will say though is this: I think most of the folks in the room know that the factor that correlates the highest with performance on norm reference test is family economic status, right? That doesn't surprise anybody in here. So what's very disheartening to me is when you look at A through F that's been done in other states, and you look at the initial ratings that were released in the state of Texas in January of this year, the correlation with family economic status of the kids at the school is very high. And so if we're spending money on a brand new accountability labeling system in Texas to confirm what we already know, which is poor kids are going to struggle more on norm reference tests, I'm not sure that was money well spent. And so with that, I'll leave A through F. I want to circle back to what Catherine talked about with regard to a community-based accountability system. And I wouldn't suggest, nor would I think it'd be feasible, that schools all across the state of Texas not give some kind of common assessment. I've heard very few educators advocate for that. The question is what percent, what amount should that weigh against what the community itself says is important? And it may be that the community says, you know, those state tests, we care about that, and that's important to us, so we're going to weigh that more heavily. But it may be that the community doesn't think that, and I think, frankly, in many communities across our state, they would not impose that kind of accountability system on themselves. We want well-rounded kids, so we want to measure how schools are providing lots of opportunities for kids. Or they'd say, we want rigor, and we define rigor as advanced placement / international baccalaureate. So we're gonna measure at least high schools that way. It is ironic to me that in a state dominated by conservative politics, this is an observation. I don't think it's a political statement. I'll try not to make it. In a state dominated by conservative politics, we have less and less local control every legislative session. I think that's terribly ironic. And when I look, as a preview of coming attractions, at the special session call by our governor, I see further attempts to attack what little local control still exists in the state of Texas. And so, in my mind, the notion of accountability ought to have at least some significant portion based on what the community, teachers and board members and parents actually think is important. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Thank you. Well, I think it's the part of the program now where we will give you a chance to ask questions and have our audience ask. Okay. Okay. We have some of these that will be addressed to a particular person on the panel, and then there'll be some that will be addressed to all members. What is the SAISD or NISD's reaction to the Houston Chronicle article on special education and its underfunding and underrepresentation of students?
So for me, I was surprised because I've just never heard of a state having either a restriction or an implied restriction on special needs children. Our district has always been above the state average, which is not good or bad, it's just a fact. I will tell you, for some of our children that have significant special needs, it is very important because the earlier that we can diagnose them, the better of an opportunity we have to get them a better quality of education. So for me, it was troubling. Again, I didn't fully understand it because I just, again, I had never seen that before.
So the references to the Chronicles look at special education percentages of students enrolled across the state, and what they found was that Texas has multiple accountability systems. It has the one that's mostly based on tests that we were just talking about. It has another one called PBMAS that's a performance-based system that measures a whole other set of rubrics. Hidden within that performance-based, hidden in plain sight in that performance-based system for years was this measure that if you had more than the state average of special education students, that you had to develop essentially a plan to kind of figure that out. Well, these are public schools, right? We enroll who comes to the door, so that was something that Northside we never concerned ourselves much with. We've always been well above the state average. We continue to be well above the state average today. And so at least locally, that wasn't as big an issue.
Okay. How are we preparing our students to face a global workforce? Please. Jobs in IT and nursing, for example, are high-paying jobs that compete on a global level. So this would then be a multiple range of different kinds of occupations. And I'll start with the ladies this time.
There are some remarkable schools that combine the elements of preparation for a career with the regular school curriculum to enable a student to pursue their training and their education in that field faster and more effectively, either with community colleges or with other higher education institutions. We have early college high schools in the state, where we've got some unique schools as well that have gotten together with the community college or with the higher education institution and designed something that works for that community and for the likely jobs that that community will hold in the future. I'm really impressed with those. There are instances of those all over the country. I read about a high school in California, in Vista, California, where my niece actually lives. And they have an amazing high school where every student is working on things that address what they want to have happen next for them, whether it's an academic career, which a lot of kids don't think of anymore, or whether it's a job. Nursing was mentioned, IT, technical jobs were mentioned. There are skilled manufacturing jobs that have high pay and go begging. So you can look all across the country and find really exciting examples of those things, as well as looking right here in Texas at some of the opportunities that are available to students. We need to let the public know about these and get better support for them.
So there's an internal conflict for me in thinking about college preparation and career preparation and how those come together. So I think we are doing an amazing job with offering lots of choice in many places. But then it raises a serious question for me about access to those choices. Our comprehensive high schools have gone from being criticized for being, they used to have the term shopping mall high school, where you get a little of anything if you wander through it long enough, right? Versus focused career academies and pieces like that. And I think our challenge is to think about what's the balance, the midpoint of this. It breaks my heart in some realms to see the destruction of the neighborhood school that is the hub of a community and that offers that support for an entire sets of families and actually reestablishes community, and where sometimes that's eradicated. And I know how kids can soar when they go to health careers, or if they go to the International School of the Americas, my old school, and we're set on a trajectory toward learning there. And so I think we've got this constant rub to think about, and how many different purposes we're serving. How important is it for students when they leave high school to be really great learners to move into the future in whatever career or college pathway they choose, versus how much responsibility we take on in public schools to train people for a career, specifically. Let's get that closer. And so, so that's my dilemma with these kinds of issues, is trying to find that balance between access so that all kids can choose and what's reasonable when we're thinking about those kinds of pieces and balancing choice and access to that choice across our community. So I have a broader perspective.
Yeah, I was actually going in exactly that direction. And I think we feel that tension all the time. There are certainly students, kids, families who have in their mind a clear direction of what they want to study and where they want to go and what that looks like. And so do we provide options for those kids? Yes, we do. But I don't think that that necessarily describes every student. And I don't think that it necessarily describes every really great student either. The notion that we can sit here today and predict the job market for a 14-year-old sitting in one of our schools today is asinine, right? That is not reasonable. And so I don't know that ours is necessarily to teach a laser-focused set of skills as so much as it is there is a basic learning amount of knowledge that educated citizens must possess. And then this notion of critical thinking, this notion of being able to work with other people, and you hear it described in all kinds of ways, that applies in most folks' jobs, no matter what it looks like, whether it exists today or it hasn't been invented yet, I think has a lot of value. So I worry about a focus on a single set of skills, whether they be for a job need or whatever's driving that. We just don't want to prepare students for a job market that exists today, that 10 years from now, when they're ready to go into that job market, no longer exists.
I'll just add that for us, again, we know that if our children have a passion for learning, they're going to be fine. That's number one. I will say this, though. When we identify something that motivates them, the question we're asking is how do we get them how do we raise expectations so that the quality of what they're getting is the highest it can be? So I'll just give you an example. We have culinary programs in our high schools. When we, in the last bond, our board was very proactive on building our culinary programs in most of our high schools. And what we found when we did them is great facilities, but the program wasn't that great. And so, and it wasn't that a lot of the children wanted to go into culinary, but there was a subset. So we decided, well, who's the best in this here in San Antonio? And it was the Culinary Institute of America. So we just announced recently a partnership with the Culinary Institute of America where they have now trained and certified our instructors. We're using their curriculum. And so for my children that really want to do that, they have that option. Now, by the way, most of them will take a culinary class and they'll like it and they'll say, yeah, but not for me. That's okay. But if they're going to pursue this, now they can get up to 30 credit hours that transfers directly into the CIA, Culinary Institute of America, not the other CIA, and they can pursue a bachelor's degree if they want to in New York, because so many of our best restaurants are actually graduates of the Culinary Institute of America. So for me, whatever that passion is, and we're doing similar things with St. Philip's or San Antonio College, whatever they like, we say, okay, what is the best way to nurture that motivation? But I agree with the panelists. Let's not assume. Let's just see what kind of passion they have, and at the end, let's make them great problem solvers. Let's have them work in teams, and let's have them again just love to learn.
Thank you. Since I have been in the business since 1973, this question always comes up, especially in San Antonio. And it's one I would imagine that we need to get on the table and continue to talk about. And the question is, what is your thought on 16 separate and unequal school districts in San Antonio? Well, there were 4 friends up here before, and now I'm glad there's a back door over there. I will start off by saying that as we dealt with that issue years ago, we have seen so many different kinds of suggestions. We started with taxing districts that were ruled unconstitutional. And quite frankly, we have separate boards of education. We have a commissioner this time that is pretty aggressive in dealing with board relationship problems and with governance issues. But each one has its own governance and its own leadership, and that is part of the democratic process. I'm not sure we want to bring ourselves together as one big district like Houston or Dallas, but we will have some idea that in the very near future, I believe, that the accountability issues coming up are going to face, we're going to face some consolidation, I believe, and this is from somebody who's no longer in the business. So understand that while my heart is there, I understand this is a very dangerous and a very difficult issue to deal with. But as we see small districts everywhere who are trying to, there's a question about rural education in here as well. Where do we talk about consolidation? Do we consolidate all of West Texas, for example? In San Antonio, is San Antonio different from Austin or Houston or Dallas? They all have small suburban districts outside their major urban districts. So quite frankly, we're not that different than other areas, other major urban areas in the state. But I do believe that if an accountability system does become cohesive and coherent, that there will be districts that will be forced to join others, if not for financial reasons, for the simple fact that they have trouble governing themselves in the best interest of students. Now that's a political statement, and I apologize to the league for that, but it's from it's from a retired guy. So from that, I'm going to throw that on my superintendent buddies first, or former buddies.
Just so quickly, I want to echo the point that folks who live in Bexar County assume that nowhere else looks like this, and they assume that incorrectly. If you looked at the Dallas metro area, if you looked at the Houston metro area, the situation is similar. Because those central cities are so big, the school districts that serve the central part of the city are consequently very large. I think if you went and you did satisfaction surveys in those districts, some folks would say, not sure consolidation is such a great idea. The other point, though, that I think is important is this is another thing that isn't lacking for study. This notion has actually been studied. A Bexar County legislator filed a bill 1 or 2 sessions ago, I can't remember now, that mandated that DEA hire the state education agency hire a contractor to study this issue. So they did that, and what they showed was that consolidation would add to the cost of operations in the 6 to 8% range. So this issue has been studied. I think the perception persists, but the notion that you could grab economies of scale type savings, which is the argument you usually hear behind consolidation, is actually not accurate.
Can I ask?
Sure, absolutely.
I'm wondering if it's a different question. What if the question were, what would it mean to have strong governance in all of those school districts? What would it mean to have functional districts? And what then might the solution look like to let that be achieved?
Excellent point.
As opposed to the consolidation. There's very, thank goodness for the Texas Association of School Boards and folks like that do school board training, but that's typically after folks become school board members. And so what are we doing to prepare the folks who are interested in running? We have some programs here in the city that are working on issues like that, are helping folks think about what it looks like to be good stewards of their school districts. And I think there's much that we can do as a community. I think the fact that the turnout in a school board election is so frighteningly low, that we're not doing our voting job to identify strong enough citizens and encouraging people to run for those incredibly important roles. It's one of the last places of community-based democracy, and it's well worth some attention.
Okay. The whole discussion, and as I consolidate some of these, whole discussion is about how do you deal with inequality? If not by consolidation, are there other ways that you can deal with the unequal ability, unequal preparation, the unequal economic status? Mr. Martinez talked about this, about his district. What is the remedy? Is it a legislative remedy that we continue to work on our funding systems that drives money and resources to try to equalize opportunity? What can be that way of giving, and we used to talk about it in school finance about vertical equity. You don't treat unequals equally. You have to give each one according to their need. And it's a very difficult proposition. In the old days, it was a weighted pupil system, which confounded most people to the point where we tried to do away with it. But the idea that people need to be treated differently, how do we achieve that through practice?
So I think it all starts with us coming together and understanding the challenge and the problem. So many times, you hear these conversations nationally about how we're losing our middle class. The fact that companies are struggling more and more to find local workforces, so they're importing more labor. There's all these conversations, and at the same time, and we're seeing gaps grow in the country. So first of all, we have to understand it. Let's acknowledge it. Let's understand that when children succeed, regardless of their poverty level, regardless of their income level, it benefits the entire country. If you think about what happened in the 50s and 60s after World War II, when more individuals were able to go to college because of the GI Bill right after the Second World War, that changed the country completely. And so for us, it's really having those conversations. I think I saw Dr. Drennan from Trinity here in the audience. She does an amazing presentation that talks about the history of San Antonio and the impact of segregation and what happened and how we became the most segregated city in the country when it came to income. So let's have those conversations. Let's understand it. By the way, there's nothing controversial about it. It's just factual data. And then let's have a conversation about what does it take for children to succeed. And one of the things that I mentioned is that I don't know how to quantify. We can get into all the funding formulas, and like I said, I'm very passionate about that too, but I don't know how to quantify what a middle-class family can provide their children versus somebody who lives in poverty. So I was the first in my family to graduate from high school, first to go to college. My family lived in in-depth poverty. I was born in Mexico, lived in in-depth poverty is where my father came to this country. We became citizens. My father worked 2 jobs, still struggled. And because I was able to go to college, I was able to buy them their first home. Because I went to college, every one of my siblings is either finished or finishing college. By the way, 4 teachers in the family. And so, let's understand that when children succeed, we all succeed. It creates economic development. It creates economic growth. When we have segregation in terms of people that are successful versus not, it hurts the entire society. It hurts our entire community. And then let's have the conversations of how do we make sure, and what I love about this city, it's a very generous community. I will tell you, one of the things that I feel that makes us different here in San Antonio, there is a generosity that's here, there's a passion and caring that is here that I can't tell you that exists in every other location, in every other city. And so for us, let's come together and figure out what those needs are, because again, I have children that parents can't get them the tutoring that they need. They just don't have the means. I have children that, again, after they leave us, they don't have meals at home. By the way, it's not the parents' fault. They're trying their best. I'll just share with you this one last story that just brought it home to me. So we were very proud of a student that we had at one of our high schools, which got a full ride to Columbia. And very proud of the student. I mean, amazing student, very successful. But yet, we found out recently, our counselors found out that the family is about to be evicted from their apartment. And the child is struggling with, do I go to New York, or my family's getting evicted, right? And by the way, because of travel costs and books, right, he has to come up with about $2,000 to $2,500 this summer. So the counselor calls me and says, what do we do? I do not want him to not, take advantage of this great opportunity to go to Columbia. He's the first in his family to go to college. This will change the whole trajectory of his family, just like it did for me. And of course, and so again, I just share with you, I mean, these are the real stories that I see on a regular basis. And again, this is a child that academically has proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that has the intellectual ability, has the ability to completely change his family's trajectory, but these other challenges are real. And I just can't help but think about myself, who I didn't want to be a burden on my family. I vowed that I went to college, I will work 2 jobs if I have to make sure my family never has to worry about, me going to college, right? And I know that this student is having the same exact thoughts.
Thank you. There are a number of questions in here that you've asked. One about the rural schools and getting more support and resources from STEM programs and quality AP classes and different kinds of programs that are not economically efficient in smaller systems. Catherine, what have you seen in your research? What are some good practices that we're seeing with rural schools? We still have quite a number of rural schools. Of course, we've changed in Texas over the years. But what about rural schools?
I don't know the numbers for rural, but for school districts that are considered small, like Texas's definition of small is 1,600 or fewer students. We have over 700 school districts that are considered small, and the vast majority of those small districts are rural or small town school districts. What are we doing for them? Well, the school finance formulas do acknowledge that there are economies of scale that these small districts can't take advantage of, and they do get consideration through the funding formula to the extent to which the state wants to support it as part of its share. So there is an attempt to do that, but what the districts are doing themselves, I think, is more impressive and certainly more modern. A lot of them are making good use of technology. They're either working with it themselves or they're having help with their regional education service center to provide online, face-to-face, as well as online instructional materials that will help their students get some of the benefits that students in the San Antonio area get because there's such a diversity of offerings here. So that's certainly the use of technology is an important element for the rural districts, but they are not going to be able to go very far with that without being able to keep up with technology, and that involves financial resources as well. So again, it comes down to the issue of, equity is fine. I mean, let's take the superintendent's stories to heart, but we haven't tried yet really funding our formula so that we're providing the needed resources for those youngsters. We put the San Antonio school districts together and asked them, do a simple research project for a year and a half, and what are the resources that students from extreme poverty need to be able to keep up, graduate on time with their schoolmates, and have good opportunities following school. Let them come up with that number, and let's see if we can put that in the formula and really fund it. Let's do that first, and then see what happens as well. Well, okay, we've got the funding there. What else can we do? What else do we need to do?
Thank you. This next one, we'll start with Dr. Albright. What kinds of incentives are teachers, what kind of incentives do teachers have in terms of rewards for advanced degrees? Do you feel this can serve as positive role models for students as teachers get advanced degrees?
So that's been changing here in the state of Texas. There were differential pay and different career ladders for advanced degrees. They still get a bump up on the scale, but it is not a significant bump that would pay for that degree over time necessarily. It would take a number of years. I will say, though, that we have lots of teachers who are perpetual learners. They're looking to become master reading teachers, master science teachers, master mathematics teachers, and to really work on those things. I would shift that question just a teeny bit to talk about what are the career trajectories for teachers that actually let teachers stay teachers. For many years, if you wanted to move into higher pay, you moved into leadership and administration. And so I think us thinking about what does teacher leadership look like? What does it look like to compensate varying levels of teacher leadership? Right now, we stipend folks for those kinds of things. Could teachers see themselves in a growth trajectory that keeps them in the classroom and yet giving back through mentorship, through curriculum development, through all kinds of things? I think those are the kinds of things that would model that. And do I think it's important for us to model that continued learning for students? Absolutely. But I think you would see teachers doing that all the time, whether it is they go through a remarkable amount of training to be good teachers. They are out in all kinds of seminars and workshops and graduate credits in the summers, on weekends. I am astounded that anything we offer through the Center for Educational Leadership at Trinity is oversubscribed within a day of us offering it. Teachers are hungry learners. School leaders are hungry learners.
And it's baked into that culture, and so I do think that's being modeled out there. What I think is that we should look at what are the role trajectories for teachers, for state teachers.
Okay.
I would not have said it that well.
Okay, there's a couple of questions very interesting. They're asking for advice from the panel. To Dr. Clark specifically, in your experience, what methods are most effective in advocating for well-funded public education when talking to your state senators, and senators is underlined? And then I couldn't make this up, to the superintendents, what directions do you give to your lobbyist? And that's very well phrased, because you are not a lobbyist. In terms of priorities, accountability, vouchers, and compromises, how do you abdicate, in other words? What is your best process?
Well, the best process is to start now and get acquainted with your legislator before the legislative session starts. They need to know your name. They need to have seen you more than one time. It can be, they do get out in the community. Sometimes they're at a neighborhood function. Get yourself to one of those things, stick out your hand, introduce yourself. Make your first comments to your legislator a thank you. They spend a lot of time in Austin. They work hard. Whether you're happy with the results of their work is another issue, but they're working hard, and they believe they're working in the best interest of Texas, so give them a thanks for that. Continue to keep in touch with them. Once they know your name, you may send them something, a letter. Keep the points in your letter, I would say to 2. Don't have a laundry list of things you'd like to talk to them about. When the legislature's in session or when they're in their office in the region, find a time to see them again. All of this is before the session starts. When the session starts, that's the time to make specific requests for either action or at least for deliberation for specific legislation. So you'll need to keep track of legislation. There are some good ways to do that. If you are online, the Texas Tribune covers legislation very well, including education. And if you see me afterward, I can give you some folks to contact with interesting either free or low-cost ways to keep up with the legislation. But get to know them. Make sure they have a good impression of you from the beginning with a thank you. Keep communicating with them, and when the legislature's in session, they're more likely to listen with real ears to what you have to say.
So, with regard to advocacy around particular issues, obviously there are lots of groups. Part of what happens in a state as large as Texas, in a state where school districts are so diverse by the kids they serve, as well as by size, the whole urban-rural dynamic. There's so much diversity across school districts. What a lot of school districts have done is choose to belong to groups that tend to have a similar set of beliefs, sometimes informed by those factors of who they serve and where they are and so forth. And so, for instance, we knew the notion that funding would run up against vouchers didn't just happen in the last 2 weeks, right? We could have predicted that many, many months ago, that those two issues were going to compete at the end of the session. And we were pretty clear, the organizations that I'm familiar with and I'm a part of, that we weren't going to compromise on that. That was an absolute no-go, and the group had to really look at itself and look at its financial situation and say, are we prepared to say no to funding per child in order to prevent vouchers? And that's a hard conversation for folks to have. And ultimately, those groups decided that was in the best interest of the students in the school district and moved forward. But those types of conversations happen virtually every session around some set of issues, frequently funding.
And I would just add, just to really get involved, as my colleague said, get to know your legislator, get to know the legislators that are at the leadership positions. Speaker Strauss, by the way, has been a huge advocate for us in public education. But get to know the legislators both on the Senate and on the House, and let them know your opinion. I will tell you, I mean, they expect Brian and I and our associations to be there at the table. Sometimes, you know, I always wonder, is the state as big as this is? It actually feels to me sometimes like a small town. I just tell you, it just feels like that to me. And when your voice is heard, especially on something as fundamental as education, something as fundamental as making sure we have equity for our children that have more needs, something that supports the economic investment and development of the state, I think that can be very powerful. And you know, there's several ways for you to see what those are, including you can call any of our districts and we can tell you who's leading which legislation, on which side of the legislature. And it doesn't matter if you're here in San Antonio, don't be afraid to call somebody in Dallas or in, you know, in the area around Houston or Austin, because this is our state and these are all our children, and all of us have a vested interest in their success.
One quick aside. So frequently when I go visit a legislator that I don't know, I'll take a picture of a 5-year-old. It doesn't matter. Any 5-year-old will work. And I'll say, you see this? Is that your son? No, it's not. It's a 5-year-old who goes to school in my district. This is the ultimate infrastructure project. This right here is the most important infrastructure project in the state. Even if you don't like kids, even if you're just in it for economic development. If we don't invest in this, the rest of it doesn't matter.
Some things that are on people's minds tonight. One is on early childhood, wanting to know how the best way to communicate to the legislature the importance of play, socialization, and movement in the classroom, which I fully advocate. How can we get this across to the legislature to make all schools developmentally appropriate? The other is, and I love it in simplicity, where did all the kindergarten funding go? And of course we have the questions that will be addressed, I guess, in quite, and to use Brian's words ad nauseum, we will see the questions about sex education, about immigration, the bathroom bill. All of those will become part of the discussion that will impact schools in this next special session. I don't know if anyone would like to comment on any of those, but at this point we're about out of time, and that would be something for another discussion. We've seen also concerns about charter schools that do you think those are segregating the school districts that you have? And having something that at some point, that discussion about what happens in a school when you begin to have those kinds of programs coming in and working with all different students, and with these, in fact, be able to meet the needs of special needs students. That will be a big debate, and I suspect in this special session, especially with the voucher issue on special needs children. All of those questions are on people's minds tonight. The last one for you would be, what is the one thing you would like to see happen in education? The one thing.
So I'll start, and I'll actually say the answer is probably not around funding, although that would make the top 5, I can tell you that. But if pressed to one, I think the answer would be a turnaround in the public perception of those who have chosen to become educators. Catherine, I think, mentioned, and I think she's spot on, that there's a national, it's not just a state issue, there's a national conversation that is focused on teacher bashing and claiming that schools are wasteful, not necessarily with a whole lot of rich data. And really, to Shari's point, which is just heartbreaking, that when the legislature meets and there's conversation around funding or the lack of funding, and there's conversation about teachers can't pay their professional association dues through payroll deduction, even though it costs taxpayers exactly $0. Those kinds of really hurtful conversations, I think, impact our ability to bring the best and the brightest to this work. And that's a sad state of affairs. So, look, I was a classroom teacher, and I did not always make all of the best decisions. I don't in the work that I do now. I suspect that there are some others of you sitting in the audience who are not perfect every minute of every day. As that is the case, we really, I think, not so much in this room, but in the larger conversation, and it starts with legislators, I think, our legislators are high on the list, we need to really kind of remake the whole conversation about the value of educators, what they provide to our society, because it impacts the bottom line of getting those really great teachers to come to the classroom.
Thank you.
I'll just piggyback on that. I would say it's the re-engagement of the community in the conversation about schools. And that having folks recommit to owning their public schools, to being engaged with their public schools, to speaking out about their public schools, to sharing the great stories and letting us know if things aren't going well, and not going to the media, but going to the principal or to the teacher, and to be in relationship deeply with our public schools, to do more to turning things around. It would bring that focus, that community focus back to our schools. And I think that the power's in our hands to do that.
Just put it, same thing a different way. I'd love to re-energize the notion that there's a common good in education. That it's a common experience that at least most of the people in this room have had. We close our eyes, say, think about school. What do you see? And write it down on a piece of paper. There would be enormous uniformity among the people in this group because we had a common experience. We went to school with people we didn't like. We went to, the kid across the street. We didn't necessarily resonate with that child, but we went to school with them, and we went through things that, people up at the front say were there to expand our horizons, give us new look. I think there was a sense that education was there for the common good and that we were all in it together. I would like that to come back and resonate for more communities.
Similar to my colleagues, just to have much more engagement and participation in our community and what's happening in our state. I'm still new, and I always remind people, even though I've been here 2 years, I'm still learning. But what I see is a lot of division. I do see, as my colleagues have said, our teachers feel under attack. They don't feel respected. We have nationally, less individuals going into the colleges of education than ever before. And we have a shortage of teachers here in our state. And so for us, recognizing that the best investment the state can ever make is in education, the best investment it can ever make is in public education, and that it can be a state that can show the country. It can show the country what's possible. Most states are jealous of our state, of the diverse economy that we have, the type of industries that are in this state. And so, what I would wish is I wish they were jealous of our educational system.
I want to thank the panel. Finally, before we say thank you to everybody, I'd just like to say as the moderator, and Catherine mentioned it a moment ago, that after all my years in education, it's come down to this. Public education is for the public good. The result means an educated public who vote, who participate, who value others, and respect the rights of all. And that, to me, is what the League of Women Voters has given us an opportunity to discuss tonight. Thank you, panel, and thank you so much for joining us.
Well, on behalf of the League of Women Voters, I want to thank Shari Albright, Brian Woods, Catherine Clark, and Pedro Martinez, and I also want to thank Richard Middleton for doing such a great job moderating the panel. And I want to thank all of you. The fact that you all are here tells me that there is interest in education, so engaging public with the education, that's what the idea is. And I'm glad that, there is a lot of food for thought for all of us, and we will be thinking about it, We will be getting back to you guys if we have any questions and concerns, but I thank you to take time from your busy schedule and come and join us and share your expertise and ideas with us. I also want to mention that NOWCast was live streaming the program, which you can also watch later on. So we will be putting the link on our League of Women Voters website, lwvsa.org. So you can go to our website. So any friends or colleagues who could not come and attend this evening, they don't have to miss this absolutely fabulous discussion. They can watch it on this. So with this, I conclude the program, and thank you very much, all of you, for coming and joining us. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.